Now, back in 1976, of course, they restarted the death penalty regime, and in Florida, they've taken advantage of that to do a significant number of executions, 84 to be exact. And there's one interesting fact about that that might put into question how they adjudicate the death penalty and how they carry it out. Well, it turns out that in the state of Florida, no white person has ever been executed for killing an African American. Now, okay, you look at that by itself, you might say, look, there's a lot of different states. Could be just a coincidence that that's how Florida came out, and maybe in other states they're lean more in the direction of a lot of white people that killed black people, because there's plenty of that in the country, get executed. No, you don't really find that evidence anywhere. In fact, you find more evidence of bias in how the death penalty is executed in different states. For example, in Alabama, 60% of black death row inmates were convicted of murdering a white person. Well, okay, now this is where a lot of conservatives would say, yeah, but that probably happens so often and so overwhelmingly that that's why you have the number 60%. So why don't you give us proper context? Well, I'm glad you asked. So how often did it happen? 6% of murders in Alabama involved black defendants and white victims. But 60% of black death row inmates were convicted of murdering a white person. Those numbers seem a little disproportionate. Okay, so well, we got Florida and Alabama. How about Louisiana? The death sentence in Louisiana is 97% more likely in murder cases where the victim is white. So, now a lot of people know that black defendants wind up disproportionately higher chance of being on death row. Now we know that, and that's a problem with the death penalty, because we realize that perhaps certain groups have been targeted more. And in fact, a lot of the people who are on death row, who happen to be African American, later were found out to be innocent. In fact, that just happened last week. We did the story of a guy who was on death row for 30 years. He was black. He was the gardener for somebody who had been killed. And it turned out, well, not only was it two white brothers who had done it, and not the black gardener, but that the prosecutors hid evidence to that effect. And they kept him on death row for 30 years anyway. So you've got those stories. You've got the numbers, right? Now, the other thing that you have is, if you kill a black guy, well, are you really going to get the death penalty? Well, it turns out it's a lot less likely. If you kill a white guy, you better watch out, because that's when you're very likely to get the death penalty. So is there some perhaps racial injustice in how we mete out the death penalty, let alone the fact that we shouldn't have it in the first place? Because if we're letting out people from death row, because it turns out we were making mistake after mistake, and we've now let out dozens of people that were on death row, let alone that egregious fact which should end the death penalty in and of itself. If you're doing it on the basis of the skin of your color, or the color of your skin, I should say, that's another layer of injustice. When are we going to stop this ridiculous death penalty, which is clearly biased and given out all the time to the wrong people across the country?